The rain had been falling since late afternoon, steady and soft at first, like a shy visitor tapping at the windows. By evening, it had deepened into a rhythmic drumming, steady as a heartbeat, filling the little stone cottage with a sound both soothing and isolating. Outside, the world blurred, trees melted into shadowy shapes, their branches sagging under the weight of water. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp wood and the faint trace of lavender from the fire-warmed blankets. Isabel sat curled in her chair, a book resting half open on her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in over 20 minutes. She wasn't reading anymore. She was listening. Listening to the rain, yes, but also to the way it seemed to carry whispers. She had always loved storms. They gave her an excuse to stay indoors without guilt, to light the hearth and brew tea, to lose herself in worlds made of words. But tonight felt different. There was a heaviness to the weather, as if the clouds were not simply spilling rain but pressing the sky downward. A low fog clung to the hills, and the forest beyond the cottage looked impossibly dark, its outlines shifting like something alive. Isabel caught herself glancing toward the window more often than usual, each time expecting to see. What, exactly? She couldn't say. The feeling was neither fear nor excitement, but a strange mixture of both. Like being on the brink of a story you haven't yet been told. The kettle whistled sharply, startling her into motion. She poured the steaming water over dried chamomile blossoms, watching the pale gold tendrils curl upward, scenting the air with something calming and floral. But even as she breathed it in, she couldn't shake the pull of the outside world. She moved to the window and pressed her fingertips to the cold glass. Beyond the rain-slicked panes, the path leading into the forest glistened faintly under the scattered light of the oil lamp. She imagined footsteps there, splashing softly in the puddles, an image so vivid that her chest tightened, though no one was in sight. When the knock came, it was almost too gentle to hear over the storm. A single tap, then another, then silence. Isabel froze, her breath caught somewhere between her throat and her lungs. In her years living here, visitors were rare, and unannounced visitors at night were unheard of. She set her cup down and approached the door slowly, feeling the old wooden boards shift slightly beneath her weight. Another knock, firmer this time. She hesitated, then drew back the latch and opened the door just a crack. A man stood there, though man seemed too simple a word for what she saw. His shoulders filled the doorway, his cloak dripping rain onto the threshold, and his eyes, deep, amber, and unblinking, held hers with a strange intensity. His features were striking, almost beautiful, but edged with something wild, untamed. Behind him, the forest swayed, and for an instant, Isabel thought she saw something else moving in the shadows beyond, something large and hulking, a shape that vanished the moment she blinked. Claire barely slept that night. The rain never stopped, its constant drumming on the tin roof a reminder that she was utterly alone on the mountain. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined the whisper again, soft and deliberate, threading through the storm. By dawn, the clouds remained thick and heavy, casting a gray pallor over the cabin interior. The photo she had found the night before nagged at her. She couldn't remember anyone ever taking that picture, and the angle, low, hidden among the trees, felt invasive. She decided to distract herself with routine, coffee, a fire in the hearth, and a check around the property. But when she opened the front door, fresh muddy footprints led from the porch steps to the edge of the forest. They weren't hers. The prints were large, too large to be Claire's, and shallow, as if whoever left them had been careful not to sink into the mud. They disappeared just beyond the tree line, swallowed by the dense undergrowth. Claire's stomach tightened. She considered calling someone, her brother, maybe, but there was no cell reception this high up the mountain. The landline inside the cabin still worked, but she wasn't sure who she'd even report this to. The storm had downed branches everywhere, so maybe a hiker had gotten lost. Yet, the placement of the prints didn't look like a frantic escape or an accident. They looked deliberate. Watching the BY mid-afternoon, The rain thickened again, drumming a chaotic rhythm against the windows. Claire kept busy, stacking firewood and tidying the living room. But her thoughts kept circling back to the attic door. She could still hear the whisper in her memory, faint but insistent. As the sky darkened, she pulled the curtains shut. She caught herself glancing toward the hallway more than once, half expecting to see the attic door ajar again. The old cabin groaned with the storm, rafters popping, window panes rattling, and every noise seemed amplified. When dusk fell, the sense of being observed settled over her like a heavy quilt she couldn't shake off that night. She lit only a single lamp in the living room, not wanting to draw too much attention through the windows. She curled on the couch with a blanket and tried reading, but her eyes kept darting to the darkened corners of the room. At some point, exhaustion overtook her, and she drifted into a restless sleep to the sound of rain hammering the roof. Sometime after midnight, a faint creak woke her, the kind of sound a single floorboard makes under careful weight. Claire froze, listening. Another creak followed, closer this time, coming from the hallway near the stairs. Her breath caught in her throat. She rose silently, her bare feet soft on the rug. The fireplace poker still rested by the hearth. She gripped it tightly, the metal cold against her skin. Moving slowly toward the hall, she held her breath to hear over the rain. The creaking stopped. The hallway stretched ahead, dimly lit by the dying embers of the fire behind her. And then she heard it, a single, measured footstep on the stair above, directly above her head. Someone was on the landing. Her skin prickled as she whispered to herself that maybe it was just the wood settling. But the next sound shattered that fragile reassurance. A quiet exhale, unmistakably human, drifting down the stairwell. Claire's breath came in ragged bursts, her grip on the fireplace poker slick with sweat. The shadows writhed against the walls as though waiting for a command. She tightened her stance, shoulders squared, though her legs quivered beneath her. The silence pressed heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. Then came the scrape again, closer this time, circling her. Whatever crawled across the floor was faster than before, bolder, hungrier. She spun and swung the poker blindly. The iron whistled through the dark and struck something solid with a metallic crack. A shriek tore through the cabin, high, wet, and furious, the sound vibrating through the floorboards. Lightning flashed, and she saw it lurch back, its elongated arm twisted at an impossible angle where the poker had struck. But it didn't fall. Instead, it pressed its ruined limb against the boards, dragging itself forward, its grin stretched wider, teeth gleaming like shards of glass. Claire backed against the door, heart hammering. "Stay away," she shouted, though her voice shook. She swung again, catching only air this time. The creature darted in sudden bursts, like a flicker of bad film. Here, then gone, reappearing closer each time the lightning lit the cabin. It wasn't just moving, it was playing with her. The poker felt laughably small, a stick against something that should not exist. The rocking chair slammed backward against the wall, shattering wood. The noise made Claire jump, and in that distraction, the thing lunged. She thrust the poker out, jamming it into the creature's chest. For a heartbeat, they were locked there, her arms straining against its weight, its slick skin pressing cold against the iron. The grin hovered inches from her face. She gagged on its smell, like river mud and rot. Then, slowly, impossibly, it began to push the poker aside, bending her strength like it was nothing. The lights from the storm flickered one last time, and Claire caught a glimpse of its eyes, black, bottomless, hungry. And in those eyes, she saw herself. Not her reflection, but her future, trapped, hollow, another shadow in the cabin's walls. Her scream finally ripped free, echoing through the storm as the thing forced her backward against the door, whispering with a voice both mocking and certain, "No one leaves." Claire's hands shook so badly she could barely right the toppled chair. The pale face at the window lingered in her mind. Its emotionless stare seared into her memory. The rain outside had become an unrelenting wall of noise, a perfect cover for anyone creeping around the cabin. Her first instinct was to run, grab the keys and drive, but the road down the mountain was a treacherous mess of mud and fallen branches. One wrong turn, and she'd be stranded in the storm. Instead, she chose the only plan that felt remotely safe. Turn the cabin into a fortress. She darted from window to window, checking every latch and shutter, her bare feet slipping on the wooden floors. At the front door, she dragged a heavy oak bench across the threshold, wedging it under the knob. In the kitchen, she found a cast iron skillet and placed it beside the poker. Makeshift weapons, but they'd have to do. Every creak of the old wood now felt like a warning. The storm rattled the shutters as if testing their strength. Claire pulled the curtains tighter, refusing to look out again, afraid she'd see that face waiting patiently in the dark eye in the pantry. She discovered a dusty old toolbox. Desperation lent her hands strength as she pried loose a pair of nails and hammered them into the back door frame to keep it shut. The noise of the hammering felt too loud, too reckless, echoing against the rain. When she finished, she collapsed onto the couch, wrapping herself in a blanket that did little to stop her trembling. The air inside the cabin felt heavy, like the walls themselves were closing in. She thought of her brother again, how he'd laughed off her childhood fears of the woods around the cabin, and she wished desperately she could hear his voice now. Hours seemed to stretch, marked only by the steady ticking of the mantel clock and the storm's endless roar. At some point, she dozed off, the poker still clutched in her hand. A clink woke her, the sound of glass shifting. Her eyes flew open to see that one of the windows in the hallway had cracked open just an inch. She was sure she had checked every latch. Heart racing, she approached slowly, praying the wind had forced it. But on the sill, faint in the lamplight, were wet fingerprints, large, smudged, and fresh. Before she could react, a voice, a low, gravelly murmur, came from just outside the window. She couldn't make out the words, but the cadence was unmistakable. Someone was speaking directly to her. Adrenaline surged through her as she backed away. Then, the whisper grew louder, splitting into two voices overlapping in a strange, almost conversational rhythm. Claire froze. There was more than one person out there. The realization settled like ice in her veins. Somewhere beyond the glass and rain, unseen faces waited, patient and unhurried, as if they knew she couldn't run. The whispers outside stopped as suddenly as they'd begun. The silence was worse than the voices, an oppressive stillness broken only by the relentless hiss of rain. Claire's knuckles whitened on the poker's handle as she stood in the hallway, staring at the cracked window. Somewhere outside, the intruders were repositioning, adjusting their approach. Her mind raced through every possible escape route, but the storm had rendered them useless. The only thing separating her from whatever lurked beyond those walls was old timber and a few hasty barricades. The faint scraping sound began at the back door, a deliberate drag of metal on wood. Claire crept closer, her bare feet silent against the worn floorboards. She placed her ear to the door and held her breath. Clink. Something, maybe a screwdriver, probed at the nails she'd hammered into the frame. The wood groaned softly as the nails gave just the slightest bit. Panic flared, and she ran to the kitchen, rummaging for anything stronger, finally grabbing a long carving knife. She returned to find the back door shutter once, then go still again. Lightning flashed, illuminating the living room for a heartbeat. In that instant, Claire caught a glimpse of movement outside the front window, just a blur of motion disappearing toward the porch. She barely had time to react before a heavy crash came from the side of the cabin, a shutter torn clean off its hinges, slamming against the wall. The oak bench at the front door rattled as if tested. Claire's heart hammered. She ran to the phone again, even knowing it was dead, desperation overriding reason. The line hissed with static. Then, impossibly, giggling, childlike and soft, before cutting out entirely. Suddenly, the back door burst inward, splintering around the nails she'd driven in. Rain and cold air flooded the cabin as the door swung wide. Claire screamed and stumbled backward, knife raised, but saw only darkness beyond the doorway. No figure stood framed in the storm. She edged closer, poker in one hand, knife in the other, scanning the porch. The muddy prints leading to the door were fresh and deep, their edges still crumbling under the rain. Then a thump sounded upstairs, her attention torn between the open doorway and the shadowed staircase behind her. She slammed the back door shut and jammed a chair beneath the handle, her pulse racing. The storm's noise swallowed any subtle movement, making every corner of the cabin feel alive. The thump came again from above, followed by a slow, dragging step. Lightning strobed through the windows, casting jagged shadows across the walls. Claire backed toward the center of the room, trembling, as two things became horrifyingly clear. Someone had made it inside, and whoever it was wasn't rushing. They were taking their time, stalking her, enjoying every moment of her fear. Claire's breath came in ragged gasps as she tightened her grip on the poker. The storm's roar filled every silence, but she could still hear the faint drag of footsteps above her. Whoever was upstairs wasn't in a hurry. They wanted her to know they were there. She backed toward the hearth, her eyes flicking between the staircase and the splintered back door. A sudden knock, a single, hollow bang, echoed from the front door, as if mocking her barricade. Then came a voice, low and urgent, nearly lost in the rain. "Claire, it's me. Open up." Her brother's voice. Relief hit her so hard it was almost dizzying. She hadn't told him she was coming to the cabin, but maybe he'd figured it out when she didn't answer her phone. "Eli," she called, her voice cracking. "Oh, thank God. There's someone inside." She dragged the oak bench from the door, fumbling with the lock, her shaking fingers slipping on the knob. The moment she opened the door, the storm's cold breath rushed in. But what stood on the porch didn't look right. Her brother's raincoat was the wrong color, darker than the one he owned, and his face was partially hidden beneath a dripping hood. The figure stepped forward into the light, revealing enough of his face for her to see familiar features. But his expression was wrong, twisted into a half-smile that didn't belong to Eli. "You let me in," he said, his tone flat. Something primal in her screamed at her to slam the door, but hesitation cost her precious seconds. Behind her, another creak sounded from upstairs, the footsteps again, moving faster now, as if closing in. Torn between two threats, Claire stumbled backward, leaving the door ajar. The hooded man stepped inside without invitation, water pooling beneath his boots. "Where's Eli?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The man didn't answer. He only tilted his head slightly, listening, as if gauging the movements upstairs. Lightning flared, briefly illuminating the interior of the cabin. In that strobe of white light, Claire saw the muddy footprints she'd tracked earlier weren't random. They formed a deliberate circle around the couch, a pattern she hadn't noticed before. The hooded stranger's gaze flicked to the staircase. "We need to leave," he said suddenly. "There's more than one." His tone had shifted, still unnerving, but now edged with genuine urgency. Another crash thundered above, something heavy tipping over in one of the bedrooms. Claire's instinct told her not to trust this man, but the realization that more than one intruder might be inside shattered any sense of control. The stranger reached for the carving knife on the table, and for a moment, their eyes locked. Outside, the rain intensified, a curtain of water sealing them off from the world. Trapped between the storm, the shadowed upper floor, and the unnerving figure now sharing the room with her, Claire understood a terrifying truth. Whatever game was unfolding here, she was now part of a plan far bigger and far deadlier than she'd imagined. The hooded man's gaze darted toward the staircase, the muscles in his jaw tightening. Lightning flickered outside, briefly painting his features in stark relief. Claire noticed the faint scar running along his cheekbone, something Eli didn't have. Her chest tightened as she took another cautious step back, keeping the poker raised. "You're not my brother," she whispered. The man's expression didn't change, but the corners of his mouth twitched as if acknowledging the accusation. "No," he admitted quietly, "but I know what's in this house." His words were steady, but his voice carried a tremor, fear, or guilt. She couldn't tell till he lowered the hood, revealing a soaked head of dark hair plastered to his forehead. "My name's Nathan," he said. "2 nights ago, my friend vanished out here. He said he'd found something hiding in these woods. I followed his trail to your cabin. The photo you found? That was his." Claire's mind reeled. The stranger's story fit too neatly with her own unease, yet it sounded absurd. "You expect me to believe that?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Nathan gestured toward the window where the rain sheeted down. Believe what you want, but I wasn't the one upstairs. Another creak echoed from the landing, deliberate and slow. Nathan shifted his weight, knife still in hand, and stepped closer to her, though not threateningly. If we stay divided, we're dead, he said. They're toying with us. Claire hesitated, her instincts screaming not to trust him. But the noises upstairs, the dragging steps, the subtle thumps, left little choice. Show me proof you're not one of them, she demanded. Nathan reached into his jacket pocket and, very slowly, withdrew a folded piece of paper. It was a map of the mountain trails, marked with strange symbols she didn't recognize. One symbol matched the exact location of the cabin as thunder rolled through the valley. A muffled thud came from the kitchen, something falling from a counter. Both of them spun toward the sound, adrenaline spiking. In the reflection of the darkened window, Claire saw not just her and Nathan's figures, but, for a split second, a third shape, tall and narrow, standing in the kitchen doorway. When she turned, the doorway was empty. Nathan stepped in front of her instinctively, raising the carving knife. "They're inside," he muttered. His voice had lost its edge of bravado. Now it sounded like a man barely holding himself together. Claire's hands trembled as she pointed toward the staircase. "We need to know what we're up against." Nathan nodded grimly. Together, they edged toward the stairs, the storm's roar outside muffling every creak of the old floorboards. As they began to ascend, another sound, a faint, almost playful tapping, came from the attic door above. The rhythm was deliberate, like someone drumming their fingers in anticipation. Claire glanced at Nathan, whose face had gone pale. The tapping stopped, replaced by the low hum of a voice singing off-key, a tune so familiar it sent a chill racing up her spine. It was a lullaby her mother used to sing when she was a child. The staircase groaned beneath Claire's weight as she followed Nathan upward, each step creaking like an alarm. The storm outside had become a deafening presence, thunder rolling in long, drawn-out waves that shook the cabin's beams. The attic door loomed above them at the end of the narrow hall, a squat rectangle of wood that seemed to pulse in the flickering lamplight. The lullaby still hummed faintly through the noise, its off-key tune crawling under Claire's skin. Nathan gripped the knife tighter, glancing back to meet her eyes. "Stay behind me," he whispered, though his own voice betrayed a tremor. They paused at the landing. A sudden tap-tap-tap on the attic door broke the silence between thunderclaps. Claire swallowed hard, the poker feeling heavier now. The rhythm was almost playful, too deliberate to be the house settling. Nathan took a slow step forward, his boots leaving faint muddy prints on the carpet runner. The air felt colder here, as though the attic itself exhaled a damp chill. Claire's ears strained against the storm, catching another faint sound, the whisper of movement behind them, on the stairs they had just climbed. She risked a glance back, but saw only the empty stairwell below. Lightning flared through the hallway window, and for an instant, a distorted shadow appeared beneath the attic door, a pair of long, spindly legs that didn't match any human form. The light vanished, leaving only darkness and the sound of rain. Claire gasped involuntarily. Nathan's jaw tightened, and he mouthed silently, "Did you see that?" Before she could answer, the attic door creaked open an inch on its own. A stale gust of air swept out, smelling of damp earth and something older, something that didn't belong. Nathan raised the knife and nudged the door wider with his foot. The attic beyond was pitch black except for a single dangling string connected to an old bulb. He reached out, yanked it, and a sickly yellow light flickered on, casting jagged shadows across the cramped space. Boxes and old furniture cluttered the attic, but what caught Claire's eye was a circle of footprints pressed into the dusty floorboards. Large, wet prints that shouldn't have been there. Near the far corner, a section of the floor was unnaturally clean, as if something heavy had been dragged away recently. And in that far corner, half hidden by a stack of boxes, something shifted. The figure that emerged was hunched and pale, its movements deliberate but strangely fluid. Claire couldn't see its face, just the outline of shoulders too broad and arms that seemed to bend unnaturally. It took one step toward them, and the old bulb flickered violently. Nathan stepped in front of her, knife raised, but the creature, or person, didn't rush. Instead, it tilted its head, mirroring the same gesture Nathan had made earlier downstairs. A deep, guttural sound rolled from its chest, neither human nor entirely animal. And then, without warning, it lunged. Nathan shoved Claire backward, and the attic erupted in chaos as the storm outside reached a fever pitch. The attic exploded into chaos. The pale, hunched thing lunged, its limbs moving with a sickening elasticity, knocking a stack of boxes into Nathan. Claire's scream was swallowed by thunder as she swung the poker wildly, connecting with a hollow crack that sent vibrations up her arms. The creature staggered but didn't fall. Instead, it turned its head a full 90 degrees, studying her with an unnatural stillness before letting out a rasping hiss. Nathan scrambled to his feet, grabbing her arm. "We can't fight it," he shouted over the storm. "We have to run." Paragraph 2. They bolted down the staircase, the cabin trembling under the gale outside. Behind them, heavy steps pounded in pursuit, first slow, then unervingly fast. Claire's feet slipped on the wet wood near the back door, but Nathan caught her, yanking her toward the front. The oak bench she'd used as a barricade had been shoved aside, the door hanging open like an invitation. Rain and wind howled through the gap, whipping her hair into her face. She hesitated, glancing back up the stairs, just in time to see a pale hand curl around the railing. Paragraph 3. The two of them plunged into the storm, the downpour instantly soaking them to the bone. The forest loomed like a wall of black teeth, its branches thrashing violently in the wind. Claire's lungs burned as she stumbled through the mud, her boots sinking into the earth. Nathan led her toward the faint glow of a trail marker deeper in the trees. The sound of pursuit followed, crunching underbrush, snapping twigs, but distorted, as if there were more than one set of footsteps now circling them. Every flash of lightning revealed nothing but trees, though the feeling of being watched was suffocating. They reached a narrow ravine where rainwater gushed down the slope, carving slick channels through the soil. Nathan motioned for Claire to climb, pushing her upward as the mud threatened to drag her back. The storm masked every sound except the thunder, but she thought she heard that lullaby again, faint and mocking, woven into the roar of the rain. Halfway up, she risked a glance behind. A shape darted between trees below, a blur of movement that seemed to multiply into two, then three shadows. Her stomach dropped. She didn't know if they were chasing one thing, or many. At the top of the ravine, they collapsed beneath a cluster of pines, shivering and soaked. Nathan pulled the map from his jacket, its ink smearing in the rain. "There's an old ranger station a mile from here," he said, breathless. "If we can make it." His words trailed off as a branch cracked nearby. Not the wind this time, but the unmistakable sound of weight. Claire held her breath, her heart hammering. The storm concealed everything, but when the lightning flared again, she saw them, pale faces between the trees, too many to count, all watching silently. Claire and Nathan crashed through the underbrush, their legs numb from the cold and exhaustion. The storm showed no mercy. Branches lashed their faces, and mud clung to their boots like anchors. Ahead, through the sheets of rain, a faint light flickered in the darkness, the ranger station. It wasn't much more than a squat concrete structure with boarded windows and a rusted metal door, but its glow looked like salvation. Behind them, the forest was alive with whispers and distant, uneven footfalls. Every crash of thunder seemed to mask a closer sound, something breathing, something following. Nathan reached the door first, pounding on it with the hilt of his knife. "Open up," he shouted, his voice cracking. There was no reply. He yanked on the handle. It was unlocked. The door creaked open to reveal a single lantern burning on a table in the center of the room. The air inside smelled faintly of mildew and old wood smoke. Claire bolted in, slamming the door behind them and shoving a filing cabinet against it. The room was Spartan. A desk, a few shelves of abandoned supplies, and a dusty two-way radio sitting beside the lantern. Nathan grabbed the radio, turning the knobs desperately. Static filled the room, a rising hiss that drowned out even the storm outside. Then, a crackle. A voice broke through. "Don't trust, he's not." The transmission cut off before either of them could respond. Claire and Nathan exchanged a panicked look. Nathan shook his head, frustration twisting his features. "It's probably just interference," he muttered, though he didn't sound convinced. Another thud rattled the door, soft at first, then again, harder. Something, or someone, was out there, testing their barricade. The lantern flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. A gust of icy wind swept through the room, even though the door was sealed. Claire's breath misted in the cold air as she raised the poker again. Nathan positioned himself near the door, knife ready. The next lightning flash illuminated the boarded windows, and for a heartbeat, pale faces pressed against the cracks between the planks, too many to count, blank and unblinking. The boards creaked under invisible pressure. Then the whispering began again, threading through the storm. A low, rhythmic chant that made the walls feel closer. Suddenly, the pressure on the door stopped. The forest outside fell silent except for the storm. Nathan exhaled shakily. "Maybe they're gone," he began, but Claire cut him off with a gesture. The chanting had ceased, but something in the air felt wrong. Too still, too expectant. The lantern's flame flared unnaturally bright, then extinguished, plunging the station into darkness. For a long, breathless moment, only the rain and thunder spoke. Then, from the far corner of the pitch-black room, a voice sang the lullaby, soft, off-key, and heartbreakingly familiar. But it wasn't coming from outside. It was behind them,